So let's now talk about trauma, which I want to rephrase as programming experiences. Now, before we begin discussing trauma, I wanted to point out that we're not looking to downplay the impact of what we define as significantly traumatic experiences, nor revisit them to ascertain new meanings out of them. That might be done with the help of someone more equipped, like a coach or a therapist or a counsellor or whomever you feel can help, because what we want to do here is to look at what we've been through for clues that have led to our current state. So when we say the word trauma, we might think straight away of books, articles, papers, blog posts, etc. written about the subject. So it's kind of hard to find a phrase that fits all meaning. A viewpoint I currently have is that trauma is anything that might cause us to suppress any part of our true self and or create an adaptation of our true self. And trauma can be anything that leads us to believe at a subconscious level that we're not good enough. And we can take a step further by further defining trauma in terms of capital T trauma and small t trauma, where capital T trauma is anything from our childhood that has had a big impact on us and that we're likely to recognise as traumatic if we saw it in other people's lives. So that encompasses things like sexual abuse, being raised by alcoholics or drug addicts, being the victim of physical violence or witnessing physical violence, being abandoned either totally or temporarily by your caregivers. So on a trauma scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being not traumatic at all and 10 being highly significant, you can think of these kind of events as anything from 8 to 10 on the scale. Small t trauma can be practically anything to a kid, depending on how it was interpreted at the time. So on the scale, you're talking somewhere between 1 and 7 on the scale as a score. So examples of this could be like a good friend laughing at us, or a parent making a flippant comment about our weight, or a caregiver that regularly judges other people for being bad or stupid, or even a grandparent rewarding us for being special. But the issue is, when we use phrases like abuse, trauma, neglect, they carry certain connotations that we might not want to associate with our own upbringing. So even if we had a bit of a difficult time, it still feels a bit uncomfortable to use any of those words. Because generally, what we think of as trauma are the capital T types that we've just talked through. But the thing here is that if a child experiences a large number of small t traumas, they may each be like between 1 to 7 on the scale, then they can all add up to the equivalent of a 10 out of 10, which is a capital T trauma. So the main challenge when we try to think up examples of trauma is that if you've had a reasonably good childhood with parents you consider to be caring and loving, the describing experiences as traumatic and neglectful sounds awful. Like, you wouldn't want to think of your childhood as being traumatic because of your parents, because you might have had caring parents and had a childhood full of happy memories. Yet when you come to think of your life now, you still feel you've got a lot of inner demons to deal with. So it might be time for a new term here. So instead of referring to these things that happen to us as children and onwards as trauma, we might want to think of them, no matter how big or small, as programming experiences. So these are typically the events that shaped how we developed from the moment we were entered this world. Now, no one is to blame for them here. We're not saying that it's because of our caregivers that we are where we are. But by referring to them as programming experiences from now on, we can think of them in more neutral terms. Now, we're not trying to downplay their impact here, nor shy away from them. We're merely just acknowledging that all traumas or experiences can fit within this definition, as well as any other experience we would rather not label as trauma, while still wanting to acknowledge the impact it had on our lives. So these experiences are some of the first signs of our self-worth coming under attack. So visually, there's a nice analogy we can use here. So if you think back to childhood, if you were a fan of video games, either playing them or watching your friends play them or seeing them on TV or film, etc., then if you think of games like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, or basically any game where your character or player had a health bar, and each time you took a hit, then your health bar would go down a bit, and the winner would be whichever of the two or more players would have their energy bar go down to 0, and you're basically the last one standing. We can think of our self-worth as represented on a similar type of bar. So each time we experience one of these programming experiences, our self-worth power bar or health bar takes an impact. So all this fuels the notion that we should take a certain mould, act in a certain manner, say the right things, and if we don't, then we're not accepted, and therefore we're not good enough. Now, remember that by saying we pick these up from the people around us does not mean it's their fault. Because as we've previously said, they themselves have picked it up from the people around them, who picked it up from the people around them, and so on. So even in the best of childhoods, we encounter many normal programming experiences that shape who we are, but are often responsible for the problems and challenges we face later in life. So it's likely that we all experience thousands of small traumas without ever realizing. And by understanding we experience these types of traumas does not mean we had bad parents. It's just that we had parents who were trying their best to raise their children. But at the end of the day, you can also say that the nature of these experiences could have been traumatic for everyone involved. So regardless of any of the work you decide to do and changes you decide to make in your own life, you either will or have already inflicted damage and trauma on other people. The fact that we were therefore inflicted as children does not make anybody bad. And the purpose of this part is not to beat anybody up. The point is to make us more aware of our actions and the actions of our caregivers that will lead us to a better understanding of why we are the way we are, so that we can do something about it. Because after all, we've got many of our best bits from our caregivers as well. So in terms of examples to highlight this, I have 2 or 3 that I'd like to share with you here. Now, obviously these aren't meant to be exhaustive examples. You will create your own, and to be honest, you'll find infinite examples wherever you may look, because these experiences come in all shapes and sizes. And the kicker being that often we think that things we might label as fairly positive programming experiences might actually result in what we consider to be negative consequences when we perceive the events through the eyes of us as kids. So this is the key bit here. We don't want to review these experiences as we are now as adults, because it's key to look at them when we experience the trauma itself. So if you think of a very small example where you were a child and on a hot summer's day you went to the ice cream van either near your house or in a park, and you got this nice ice cream with loads of sauce and sprinkles and all that on it. And as you turned away from the van, someone bumped into you and you dropped the ice cream. Now, as an adult, you might look at that and think, oh, that's a bit of an inconvenience. And if you had the ice cream in the house, you might need to clean up a bit of mess. You might also think, okay, let me get another ice cream. Or you might also say, do you know what, I don't have enough money right now for another ice cream. So you just go, well, nothing I can do. But as a child, you might take that experience as traumatic, because a few seconds ago you had a nice ice cream in your hand that you're looking forward to eating, and now it's a splodge on the floor. So this is why it's important that we look at these events as we were as children, to understand the true impact it had on us at the time we experienced it live. Another example is, as a parent, if you never told your kid that they're too fat, but you constantly talk about how people that are overweight are lazy, slobs, bit gross, the lesson your child might receive is that being overweight is bad and therefore not acceptable, which installs unhealthy programming to small minds about how good they are, because now their self-worth is linked to the percentage of fat on their body. So with that sort of framework in mind, here's 2-3 more examples. So here's a bit of a mind-bending one. A program experience we probably have all gone through is being told to be good. So as a child, we would have heard the phrase, be a good boy or be a good girl. Now, you might sit there and think, well, that's a bit weird, isn't it? Because we all get told to be good, and that's what I do as parents. That's the default thing you say to all kids, isn't it? Well, it's true. That is true that we all use it and have heard it before. But think of it this way. When we're told to be good, especially when we're being told repeatedly, then what we're also subconsciously being told is that being bad is not acceptable. And consequently, being bad is something to be ashamed of. The thing is, there's a part of us that's bad. So we're acutely aware from a very young age that parts of us want to scream and shout, be selfish, be jealous, and generally act in a way that people around us don't like. Now, the programming comes from being taught that those parts of us are not acceptable and therefore we're not good enough. The next example says, when we were a child, we heard things like being told we were special. Now again, you might recoil and go, well, that's a bit stupid again, because I tell my child they're special all the time, and I heard it all the time, and it's a nice thing to say, isn't it? Again, that's true, we've all heard it, but here's the counter intuition from that. You see, many people, when they're siblings, may envy one of them for being like the golden child. But the subliminal message that we get from being a golden child is that when we're told that we're special, we're also subliminally being told that when we're not special, it's not good enough, and therefore you're not accepted and you're not loved. See, the problem is, deep down, even though we might put up a facade of being special and doing all our work on time and obeying rules and all that kind of thing, deep down we've got a part of us that just wants to loaf about, not do anything, and just eat our favourite food all day long. And I'm talking about the adult version here, not even the child version. And we know that that part of us is in no way special at all. And that goes against the image of what we're told we already are. So, it's an example of an innocuous, well-meaning or sounding example, but might carry negative consequences. The last example I wanted to share for now is being told, or encouraged I should say, to do really well at school, and in definition, get straight A's or pass all your tests and all your exams. So the program received here is an extension of another program experience called Always Do Better. So even nowadays, many self-help people will say, work on yourself every day, work to increase yourself 1% each day, which is all noble and well good and has well-meaning behind it. And if it works for some people, I'm not here to say otherwise. All good for you. To go through this example in more detail, I've found a sketch on YouTube, which was from a show I used to watch growing up. It's a sketch show called Goodness Gracious Me, which was aired in England in the late 1990s. And it was a comedy sketch show showing the character-filled side of British Asian culture. And one of these sketches highlights this programming experience. So again, I'll drop a link in the video to the clip to have a look. But for those of you who haven't seen it, the sketch basically goes through a couple that go through their son's A-level results before he's seen them, with the dad, first of all, not satisfied that his son didn't get straight A's, and basically comparing it to someone he knows in the community who did get straight A's. Then he's annoyed at them not doing a PhD at Cambridge instead of doing an undergraduate degree, and again comparing it to someone else's son who's already got a BSc degree. And then in terms of playing football, he's aggrieved that his son only plays for Millwall, which is a team in the third division here in England, instead of comparing it to someone else's son who now plays for Liverpool, which is the greatest team in the world, by the way. And at every juncture where the dad gets annoyed, the mum becomes increasingly exasperated, pointing out the folly of the dad's points. So in terms of A levels, which is, for people outside of England, the set of exams you take after you're a teenager, she's saying that her son did 5 A levels compared to 2 that the other son had done, that their son can't do a postgraduate degree without an undergraduate degree, and also he got into the first team at Millwall. So the punchline of the sketch is that the son himself is only 6 years old, but the dad expected him to be a footballing PhD student from Cambridge by his age. So the dad in the sketch reinforces the idea that his son isn't good enough on 2 fronts. He first of all didn't get straight A's, and the sketch goes on to show that he was in half shock when he saw that he got a B in an A level, and thus it ruined the image of an academically perfect son. And also, he isn't good enough on the front of not getting better results than his fellow community members, despite the mum disproving every notion that he had. Now, growing up in the same kind of culture, I was subjected to something similar, although not as harshly as some others. And we should remember that most of the time that we're compared to other people like this and being academically perfect, we're all still congratulated and paraded around like a trophy, particularly when we get high marks or do really well. But the thing that will stay with us when we're kids is that even by achieving highly, we're still not good enough because we're constantly being compared to other people or an ideal that our caregivers have got in mind. So, I know that all might have been a lot to take in one go. The core message here is that we've come to learn that certain emotions are labelled as positive and negative, whereas in fact they're all the same and all okay to feel. And simply recognising that starts to rebuild your self-worth, because you begin to detach the default action of repressing them and suppressing them, as well as experiencing the associated feelings of shame, fear and embarrassment that come up when you feel certain emotions. And we've also learned that we've constantly had the message of "you're not good enough" from traumatic experiences in our lives, some of which are wholly unintentional and meant well, but which we've then carried through our lives as a feeling manifests further in our lives today. So for example, someone who was told to stop having tantrums when they were a child got the message that, okay, it must be bad to be angry, so I have to try very hard not to get angry. So they grow up thinking, I always have to hold it together and not show any emotion. But later on in life, they experience trouble at work because people might know how to push their buttons, and there's always a feeling of them penting up and not exclaiming their emotion out loud. And then one day, they either burst out loud or they come across as passive aggressive and causes issues at work. So what we've done in this module is to explicitly address one of the primary outcomes of the work, which is to understand suboptimal behaviours and thought patterns and their origins, and introducing new ideas to practice and realise change. So to take this a step further, in the next module, we'll look at common starting points of the work, which are places and situations we find ourselves in life when we feel stuck, unfulfilled, worn down by something, or taken in by the new shiny object-like promise of another resolution or goal, and how they all come down to the same root cause. And once we get there, we'll take away that sense of thinking of individuality, i.e. I'm the only one in the world that has this problem. I mean, your life and your issues are your own, of course. And at the same time, when we feel like that our problem isn't our own, we've got some relief that we're not the only ones that are experiencing this kind of thing. And getting to a place where all our problems come down to the same root cause will be liberating, because then you begin to realise that if you work on the ways to deal with the root cause, you can solve all sorts of things in your life. But that's for next time. Till the next module, feel supersonic.